social media is their reality.
Yeah, if I'm feeling down, then I'll look on those things and they'll just make it worse.
They have designed their algorithms and their networks exactly to cater to human pathology in its most extreme forms.
I originally set out to make a documentary that explored the possible positive benefits of diminished or controlled social media use. What I actually uncovered was something far, far darker.
David, what is the perception deception?
Well, if you look at how people come to conclusions and come to perceptions, and then you think that our perceptions dictate our behavior, then if you can control people's perceptions, you control the way they see the world and situations and people and events, and thus you dictate their response to them. And so if you look at the whole foundation of human control, it is the control of perception. That's what they're after. Because if we perceive events the way that suits this agenda of control and manipulation, then we are going to agree to things happening, or at least not challenge them, in ways that we absolutely wouldn't if our perceptions were different. So if you take the official story of 9/11 and you accept it, 19 Arab hijackers, Islamic fanatics, what have you, orchestrated by Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, then that perception will lead to support to invade Afghanistan to get bin Laden, who was behind 9/11. When you look at 9/11 from a completely different point of perception, in that it was a inside created catastrophe to justify an agenda of war, upheaval, manipulation, control in the Middle East, then that perception does not support the invasion of Afghanistan. And it doesn't support the invasion of Iraq, etc. So perception is absolutely the bottom line stadium in which human society is played out. And where does perception come from? It comes from information received. So it might be your personal experiences that lead you to a perception, but overwhelmingly, in terms of world events, people's perceptions come from the mainstream media, politicians, the system. And if you can control the information that people receive, you have a great, great chance of imposing and manipulating their perceptions. And this is the reason, quite obviously, we are now seeing this onslaught of censorship by the internet giants of alternative sources of information and alternative views. Because what has happened since the internet started, because they had to sell the internet in a way that people wanted to use it, is that it allowed information to circulate that challenged the official narratives. But the point has been reached where that is having such an effect in getting people to say, well, hold on, maybe the world's not like I thought it was, that the game is on now to stop that information circulating. So this is what the perception deception is. It's manipulating perceptions that suit an agenda of human control and doing everything they can to stop people having a perception that would see through the game, see through the smoke screens of manipulation.
How specifically is our perception controlled in 2019? How exactly does modern propaganda work?
Well, propaganda has been part of human manipulation as far back as you can perceive. I mean, you know, if you are leading a group of people and you want a war against another group of people, then you demonize the group you're targeting, and you, as much as possible, get your population to be in fear of the target that you want to attack. So this is a methodology, a modus operandi that's been going on for as long as we can go back in history. But of course, what's happening now is perceptual manipulation potential has just had layer upon layer upon layer of new ways and more powerful and potent ways of manipulating human perception. Of course, we're now in the land of artificial intelligence and technology. And the idea in the end, because up to this point, information has had to be controlled to manipulate perception in the way that I've described. But the end game, and we're looking in the face of the end game now, if you look at the timescales that people like Google's futurist, Ray Kurzweil, is talking about, which is the 2030s, the end game is to connect the human brain body to artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence becomes the human mind and usurps the one that we perceive with now. So at that point, you're no longer having to manipulate information to manipulate perception. Your perceptions are coming direct through artificial intelligence. And the very idea, it just shows the scale of perceptual manipulation and programming that goes on, that many people think that it would be a good idea to have your brain connected to artificial intelligence when artificial intelligence then feeds you your perceptions. I mean, if you go take a step back and look at it with not just an open mind, but a free one, when you can see what is rather than what we're told to see what is, then obviously connecting the human brain to artificial intelligence and the human body to artificial intelligence is insanity. It's the end of freedom. It's the end of humanity as we know it. And so these are the levels of perception, control, and manipulation that we're now moving into. And of course, what they've done is, I lay it out in the books, and I'll lay it out in the speaking events in Australia soon. They have got so much of the population addicted to the technology. First, you get them addicted with technology they hold, then you move on to technology on the body, all these gadgets that people wear, and the Google Glass and the Bluetooth and all that. And then you get inside the body, which is already happening with internally placed microchips. This addiction can be seen in the big queues. People standing in line at 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is to get the first of the latest upgrade of some gadget. It's an addiction. You look at people and they can't put the phones down. Digital heroin, it's been called, and that's exactly what we're looking at. The brain, which is malleable through something that scientists call brain plasticity, the brain reforms the way it processes information on the basis of the information it receives. So if you look, I mean, I'm 66, coming on 67, and for the great, vast, overwhelming majority of my life, this technology wasn't here. And yet we've gone from it coming in to people being on an enormous scale addicted by it and to it in this incredibly short period. So the brain has suddenly had to cope with a completely different source and nature, this digital electrical information, that it's never had to deal with before in its entire what people call evolutionary history. And it's changing the way that people, particularly many young people, process information. And it's being done, like I say, systematically. And this is the big frontier that they want us to cross, because once we do, like I say, humanity as we know it will be no more.
And this is why you call Silicon Valley the devil's playground.
Yeah, I call Silicon Valley the devil's playground. I've been there a few times. It's not the greatest, most beautiful place in the world, I'll tell you that. And in terms of its what goes on there, it's seriously unbeautiful. Now, I'm not saying that all technology is bad, of course not. But technology must serve humanity's interests, not control them, which is what it is. Although I call Silicon Valley the devil's playground, this stuff that I'm talking about, this agenda, is not coming from Silicon Valley, it's coming through Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is the where it's dispensed from, where it's delivered from. But the agenda itself goes deeper into the shadows, much deeper into the shadows. It goes into the Pentagon, goes into the intelligence networks, the Pentagon organization DARPA, the Pentagon's technology development arm, and companies like the CIA company, InQtel, or IQT as they call it, which also seed funds technology that serves the interests of the military intelligence complex. They are the next stage into the shadows from Silicon Valley, which are driving this agenda. And if you look at what a military intelligence complex would want, one, they want to have 24/7 surveillance in real time of the population. Well, we've reached a point now, thanks to things like Facebook, where they don't even have to go looking for the information, personal information, private information. People post it for them every day, even what they're having for dinner. Number two, they want to control the information that people see or don't see to manipulate perception. Well, increasingly, of course, as information and where people get their information goes onto the internet, you are having a situation where algorithms kick in now with internet and digital communication, where you don't even need human sensors sitting there saying, well, no, that's not being seen, that's not being seen. You just put in key coding into your algorithms, your AI, and it will censor by default what people see and what people don't see. So there's number two. And number three is this agenda that I'm talking about of AI taking over the world, including an extraordinary impact on jobs that's coming, and connecting the human brain to artificial intelligence. Well, a lot of people won't realize this, but organizations like Google, which is supposed to be a search engine, and Facebook, which is supposed to be a social media platform, and Amazon, which is supposed to be a retail website, are actually at the cutting edge of AI and this whole agenda of usurping the human mind with AI. So Silicon Valley ticks, maybe kicks as well, but certainly ticks every box for the military intelligence network. And then you go further back in the shadows, deep in the shadows, and you're into the networks of secret societies that actually control the Pentagon and the intelligence network.
What is the postage stamp consensus? What is the matrix?
Well, I've been talking about what people call the Matrix for a long time now. I've been convinced since the turn of the millennium that we live in a simulation. And at that time, this was hardly talked about. There was a guy called Nick Rostrom at Oxford University that was talking about it, and that was pretty much it. But now, of course, you're seeing more and more mainstream scientists coming out and saying, well, actually, if you look at it, it does look like we're in a simulation. I mean, the physics of video games and the physics of the world that we call the world are basically the same. And see, this is one of the great ways that humanity is being hoaxed and is being scammed, to keep from us the actual true nature of reality that we're experiencing, what this world is. We are told or led to believe, despite the findings of quantum physics, that basically this world is solid. It's a series of solid people and solid things interacting with each other. It's not. As quantum physics has shown beyond question, what we see as physical is actually just vibrating energy, vibrating, I would say, information in the form of energy. And I would put it like this. If you take Wi-Fi, what is it? It's information in the form of radiation, energy. And it just stays in that form unless you get a computer which tunes in to that Wi-Fi and decodes it from the form that information is in the Wi-Fi to the form that we see on the screen. People say, oh, the internet's, pictures on the screen and graphics and words. Oh, yes, it is. But that's only on the screen. That's the only place the internet takes that form. Everywhere else, it's Wi-Fi fields, it's electrical coding and mathematics and whatever. And we are doing the same. I go into this in the books in detail, explain how it works. I'll do so also in Australia. We live in a massive sea of energy. Now that's taken for granted. But that energy is information. I call it cosmic Wi-Fi because the principle is the same. And what we're doing is decoding that information through the five senses, which do what? Look at the ear, but all the senses are the same. They take waveform information, what I would call Wi-Fi. They turn it into electrical information. They communicate that to the brain, and the brain then decodes that into what I would say is digital stroke holographic information, which is the world that we perceive to be outside of us, but is actually inside of us. And if you look at the analogy of the internet, although the Wi-Fi is outside of the computer, the world it decodes into manifestation on the screen is inside the computer. Same principle. And so when we talk about out there, it's actually in here. The only place this world exists in the form that we experience it, which is this physical world, is inside of our decoding processes of the brain. Outside of that, this world is vibrational information, waveform information. Now, this brings about a situation where if you can control the information in that sea of energy that we are decoding into the world of what we call the real world, the perceived world, then you can get your target population to decode that fake reality which you are feeding them in the form of fake information. And if people think, well, that's crazy, that's far out, well, what is happening when you play a video game? when you put on the gloves, when you put on the headset and the earphones, what's happening is information from the game is overriding and hacking into the decoding processes of the brain through which it decodes the reality we call the world. It's overriding it, it's hacking into it. And I would say that's what the Matrix is. It's an information source that's hacked in to our reality decoding systems and processes. And we're actually experiencing a simulated world as opposed to what we would experience if that information was not hijacking our perception.
How do we go about specifically waking up out of the postage stamp consensus, the mental prisons that we live in, the Matrix?
Well, we step out of what I call in the books the postage stamp consensus. The postage stamp consensus is the incredibly, ludicrously, laughably narrow band of information and possibility that is fed to us by mainstream everything from cradle to grave. From parents that have accepted that download, they pass it on to their children, not through malevolence, but they think that's how things are. The kids then at the earliest ridiculous, laughable age again of 3, 4, start going to school, and throughout their formative years they are fed this download of the postage stamp consensus, this narrow band of the possible, this download of perception. And the mainstream media is pounding that same postage stamp perception out throughout people's lives because most people accept that, though it is changing, but most people accept that. It means that everyone around you, or most people around you, who've accepted the postage stamp download of reality are also feeding you the belief that the download is how things are. And if you challenge it and question it, then you're perceived as mad or crazy, even dangerous. And so we are bombarded from cradle to grave with a certain perception of reality from all angles. And if we're going to set ourselves free of the perceptual prison, then we need to go back to a blank sheet of paper, symbolically, and say, okay, I'm going to start again. And what I perceive and what I believe is not going to be dictated by repetition anymore. The fact that I keep hearing the same thing, so it must be true. Well, if you're hearing it from basically the same sources, the mainstream everything, well, of course they're going to keep repeating the same thing. And you've got journalists who, or what call themselves journalists, who've been through this whole process themselves. They've bought the download and they report the world from the perception of the download. Same with scientists, same with doctors, all of them, politicians. So if we're going to set ourselves free of the perceptual prison, we have to first of all say, hold on a minute, repetition of perception, repetition of how things are, is no longer going to be the criteria by which I decide what I believe and how I see the world. It's going to be on information that makes sense. It's going to be on looking at alternative sources of information and see if they make more sense than what I'm getting from the mainstream everything. And then it is having, if people conclude, as the vast majority will, that they've been lied to all their lives and actually the world is not like they thought it was, then we need to trigger the backbone to actually start talking about it and having the courage to talk about it, because you will know, people watching this will know, that the pressure is being increased all the time to not say anything that is outside of the mainstream narrative. And as it moves on, more and more reasons are being put forward for people not to have this opinion or that opinion on more and more things. I mean, people will be going, I mean, I don't do this. I refuse to do this. I will not do this. But most people now, even those that think that what they're not being allowed to have an opinion about is crazy, they go through this mental gymnastics before they speak of what should I say, what shouldn't I say, what can I leave out, or what should I leave out so I don't get abuse, or I don't get labeled this, that, or the other. This has got to stop, because if it doesn't, that's the end of freedom. Freedom's being deleted all the time. And when people say to me, you can't say that, it offends people. Well, first of all, I say, watch me. And secondly, why should what I have an opinion about be dictated to by what someone gets offended about? If people want to be offended, that's a choice. Fair enough. But there's another choice they can make, and that's not be offended. They can make the choice of respecting that while they have their opinion and every right to have it, that others actually have a right to theirs, even if it differs from yours. This is what freedom is. Freedom is the freedom to have an opinion. It's the freedom to speak your truth. It's not the freedom to censor what you don't agree with and only leave what you do agree with to be circulated. That's fascism. That's tyranny. And so if we are going to be free, then in its true sense, not the freedom to vote every 4 or 5 years for masks on the same face, and no matter who gets in, nothing changes. That's not freedom, that's a hoax. Freedom is to be able to have the opinion you choose to have and to communicate that opinion. And then we have a debate. Do you remember them, when we used to have them? Where someone says, I see it like this, and someone else says, I see it like that. And then you have a debate, and then people decide for themselves what they make and what they decide they're going to agree with or not. That's what free societies are. That's how they work. And the fact that that is being crushed and crushed and crushed with ever more extreme censorship is confirmation, if we need it, that freedom is being targeted. There's a war against it. I mean, what can you say about an Australian government that seeks to punish people and parents who choose not to vaccinate their children? And let no one be in any doubt that the next stage is to make it absolutely mandatory. What can you say about an Australian government that makes voting compulsory? What if you don't agree with any of them? Oh, we'll fine you. That's not freedom. The freedom in the voting system is the freedom not to vote because you don't support any of them. These are basic freedoms. And to target parents with benefit cuts, parents in need of help, what exploitation, what merciless exploitation, so that they will have their children vaccinated for the benefit of the pharmaceutical global cartel. And at the same time, you have a Prime Minister in Malcolm Turnbull whose wife is an executive of that cartel. Then we are in cuckoo land. And if people don't stand up for this, then, well, where does anyone think this road is going to lead? Because where we are now is not where it's supposed to stop. This is just where we are now.
I want to go further down this path for the reasons that you've just outlined, and others you call political correctness, psychological warfare.
Absolutely.
Do you want to go into that a little bit more?
Well, political correctness is simply a scam to get the target population to silence itself, so that the cabal behind it doesn't have to. So what has happened in a relatively short period is that what used to be called the liberal left, and is now called progressive, a name that came out of America, particularly the West Coast. What used to be called the liberal left, which is what I grew up in and with on a council housing estate in Leicester in England, actually stood up against corporations. It stood up against attacks on freedom of speech and freedom of every kind. And it went on marches like the big marches in the 60s at Berkeley University in California, demanding freedom of speech, the right not to be censored. What's happened is an extraordinary inversion has taken place, not least through the massive funding of a guy called George Soros of the progressive left, in which now what is called progressive is an inversion, an opposite of what used to be the liberal left. And so we have this so-called progressive mindset that's actually driving political correctness and imposing this insidious censorship to stop people having an opinion about anything that isn't okay with the authorities. And so we have now, instead of these progressives going on marches demanding free speech, they're going on marches demanding it's taken away. You mustn't upset anybody. Well, why? If people only hear what they agree with and they would like to hear, then where does that take us? It takes us into an eddy in the river of perception going round and round that never moves on because there's nothing to challenge it that would stimulate that moving on. And so the way they're doing it is to encourage people, more and more people for more and more reasons, to be offended about what someone said. Because the more people that are offended by more and more things, the more excuses they have to stop anyone having a different opinion on those subjects, and therefore they increase the censorship. So you look at the ever-increasing list of things you can't have another opinion about, and that's a big red flag, flashing red light, and a question that people need to ask about any situation, any subject. Do I have the right, without abuse, to have an opinion about the subject that is not what the mainstream has? And if the answer is no, what you're looking at is a big part of this agenda of human control. Because how it works is this. If you are trying to impose something upon the population, and if you had an open debate about it, you could not win, then you're not really going to get what you want, because you're going to lose the debate and won't be able to then impose what you want. So what you do is you close down the debate that you can't win by stopping any other opinion, challenging and exposing what you want people to believe. So if you look, for instance, at the whole transgender explosion, this is nothing to do with stopping discrimination against transgender people, which I'm all in favour of not having discrimination against anybody. It's ridiculous. But that was just the initial excuse. What's happening now is, especially the young, are being targeted and targeted and targeted to question their gender when they weren't questioning it before. That is not to do with discrimination. That is to confuse more and more people, particularly the young, about the nature of their gender. And I explain in the books in detail what that agenda is. And it's actually nothing to do with protecting transgender people from discrimination, I can tell you that. And so, when you are claiming that men and women are not biologically different, not that some people can feel they're in the wrong body, I don't doubt that people have those feelings, and they should be helped and supported and absolutely not discriminated against, who have that feeling. But to say that men and women are not biologically different in terms of the body is insanity. I mean, you know, get them a mirror and let them have a look. So you can't win the debate of claiming that men and women are not biologically different. So what you do is you shut it down. Anyone who comes out with that opinion, including professors of biology here and there, get attacked, get abused, get fired for stating the bloody obvious. And this is how political correctness is being weaponized, well, it was weaponized from the start, to shut down opinions that this system doesn't want people to hear, because why? It might and would affect their perception of reality and that situation. And now we have parents who are being intimidated into silence and acquiescence about what's being taught to their children at school in this subject area, because they fear the consequences of not doing so. So we're back again to tyranny. Political correctness is a tyranny. And we have, of course, the Twitter stormers, the virtue signaling progressive, liberal, inverted Twitter stormtroopers who are on the case of anyone, particularly if they're well known, who has a different opinion. Because if you target famous people, then and there's a lot of publicity about it, then of course what happens is the rest of the population see the consequences of not having the right opinion. And so what you have again and again and again, because famous people and celebrities are obsessed with their image, they say something perfectly supportable, perfectly fair to have an opinion about, and yet the Twitter storm comes and suddenly the sackcloth is on and they're on their knees begging for forgiveness. This is ridiculous. We must stand for our opinions, our truth, and let it stand with other truths and see what people make of it. That's freedom, and political correctness is simply there to destroy freedom.
It's the policing of language and thought. I want to come back to transgender. If you can give it to us in a nutshell, what exactly is the transgender agenda?
Oh, like I say, I go into this in detail in the books, like the last one, Everything You Need to Know But Never Been Told. Basically, the race is on to create a completely different human body, a synthetic version of the biological one, and this all locks into the AI agenda that I was talking about earlier, and this synthetic human, which they're working on. I mean, you know, they're making a synthetic genome, they're making synthetic blood, they're making synthetic skin. I mean, they're doing it in front of our eyes. But the agenda deep in the shadows that we don't see is much further on than anything we see in the public arena. So, if you look at this synthetic human they want to create, it does not have the ability to procreate, and children would be produced through technological methods. Now, who described that in 1932? Aldous Huxley in Brave New World. And Aldous Huxley was an insider. He wasn't coming purely from his imagination. Just like George Orwell wasn't coming purely from his imagination. He was another highly connected man who was, like Huxley, writing from a considerable level of awareness of where this was meant to go. This is why people like Huxley and Orwell, real name Eric Blair, were able to describe a dystopian society with technology and methods that didn't exist at the time, but do now. And so Huxley talked about the world hatcheries, where children were, quote, decanted, and that parents were no longer involved in the bringing up of children, didn't even produce children. Now, one of the things I warned about a long time ago in the books was that we were going to see, unless we sorted it out, more and more decision-making by parents over what happens to their children and the upbringing of their children being replaced by various aspects of the state dictating what happens to them. I mean, I've talked already here about an outrageous one, which is pressuring parents to have their children vaccinated when they don't believe that it's right for the children for that to happen. But more and more, all over the world, because I travel so much, you see, I'm able to see the same things happening in countries all over the world, and different cultures all over the world. It's still, because it's a global agenda. And so what we're seeing is more and more power taken from parents to decide how their children are raised and given to the state. And this is exactly what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, the stepping stone technique that is taking us to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And of course, if you're going to move into a situation of, in effect, a no-gender synthetic human that cannot procreate, then you have to move, again, totalitarian tiptoe, step by step, towards that. And a massive part of that is to change people's perception of gender. So that, oh no, there is no gender, oh, there's no such thing as male and female, and all this absolute insanity. This is being done because it's taking people down the road to this no-gender synthetic human. And who are they targeting more than anyone else? The young. Because older people who have lived in a world and in a society of a certain kind and had perceptions of a certain kind about the world and about male and female, if you like, they're not so easy to persuade because they know it's ridiculous. But they are going to die out. And what's going to be left when the Brave New World is meant to come in full blown will be the adults that are now the young. That's why they're targeting the young. And so by those generations that say this is a load of rubbish, mate, dying out, what you have then is the young generations becoming adult, but a young generation that you've been targeting perceptually, mercilessly in regards to gender, day after day after day, with ever greater extremes, which is what we're seeing now. So all these things connect. And, in the talks in Australia, they are 4-hour evening talks in major cities, which are about connecting dots between apparently unconnected subjects. Because when they're connected, whoa, the world looks very different if you see them only individually and in and of themselves.
What's behind the current anti-white, anti-male, especially anti-white male sentiment within society, the media, the educational system?
Well, what is male? What is masculine toxicity? It's a form of gender, isn't it? So this attack on maleness, particularly white males, but maleness in general, is all part of this agenda as well, of fusing gender into no gender. So you want to create more and more female men, more and more male women in terms of their perceptions, and eventually what do? You fuse into a situation where the difference between male and female, even in perceptions and actions, are diluted massively, and more as this goes on. And the other thing about the masculine, what they call toxic masculinity, is there is an expression of the male that stiffens the backbone and says, we're not having it. No, enough. We are not having this anymore. They want to dilute that. I'm not saying, that going past the point of aggression and all that stuff. No, but to have the backbone to say, we're not having it. We're not doing this anymore. We're not standing for this anymore. They don't want that. Obviously, they don't want that. So they want to dilute that by calling it male toxicity, so that you have more and more male people saying, oh, okay, all right, yes, sir, yeah, okay. And of course, things like testosterone, they're not just, male expressions, though of course males have more of it, they're in women as well. So you want also to dilute the female that stands up and says, we're not having it. They want, see, this is the point. We have, and again, the more I talk about anything, the more the strands all connect. And, I'm going to connect some strands now of what we talked about earlier. If you have a population that is offended by everything, what does that mean? You have a weak population that is not emotionally strong, that is not psychologically strong, but is weak and offended by everything. Oh no, don't say that about me, oh no. I have had 30 years of unceasing abuse, constant, historic levels of it at times. But I've never once said, I'm offended, you must stop it. What I've said is, I think you're an idiot, but in a free world, you have a right to be an idiot. And I have a right not to be affected by it. So hurl your abuse, and I'll just laugh, because it's ridiculous what you're saying. So why should I be affected by it? Why should I be offended by being abused by an idiot? What would that say about me? And instead of focusing on telling people to be offended by everything, we should surely be bringing up young people and children to have so much emotional strength, so much psychological self-confidence, that whatever anyone says about them, they won't affect them at all. We should instead, because everything's an inversion, we shouldn't be saying you should be offended by that. We should be saying you should not be offended by that, because what someone says should not be affecting you like that. Come on, let's have some strength here. But what does that build? That builds a strong, self-confident, emotionally balanced population. And what will that population say when those in authority are seeking to impose their will upon them? They'll say, we're not having it. And so this systematically weak, systematically intimidated population is not happening by accident, it's happening by design.
Similarly, what is behind mass immigration and multiculturalism? I think back to Trump saying, do we really need to take people from shithole countries? What is behind it?
Well, what I've done in the last book, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told, is I've taken this agenda at least back to the 1920s. It goes back further. And there was a man in 1969 called Dr. Richard Day, who was a Rockefeller insider, who stood up at a meeting of pediatricians in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1969 and surprised everybody by telling them to turn off recording equipment and not to take notes, because he was going to tell them how the world was going to change. And that night, and in the book before the last one, it's called Phantom Self, I quote this guy at some length in one chapter. What he said that night, when you compare it to what's happened since and what is happening now, is extraordinary. But you see, he was only talking 20 years after 1984, the Orwell book came out. And if you can access this agenda, this inner sanctum where this agenda, this projected agenda is known, then you can predict the future. It's why so much in my earlier books has turned out to happen. And what he said that night was a series of things, including, by the way, describing the internet in 1969 and what was coming, even though no one was even talking about it then. He also said that what was going to happen is that they were going to instigate mass movements of people from one culture into another culture, because, he said, it's much easier to change a society which is full of people that don't have roots and history in that society, because they'll accept the change more than the people that do. And where this is heading, and again, I've been writing about this for 30 years, is the creation of a one world society involving a world government, a world central bank, a world army, a world currency, which is designed to be cashless, digital, one world currency, which I've been writing about since the 1990s, that cash was going to be taken out of circulation. Look at it. And a microchip population connected to this AI system. And it's not just about changing the nature of European society or changing the nature of American society or Australian society. It's about changing the nature of global society. So this global society would not have separate cultures. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about the Asian culture, the African culture, the European culture, the Middle Eastern culture, the South American culture. It doesn't matter. They are targeting all cultures, so that they fuse them all into one global blob culture. And it's the same process that we see with the transgender and the movement to a no-gender human. You just fuse everything into one. And so when you look at the extraordinary funding, tens of billions of dollars poured into the progressive arena, the progressive mindset by George Soros, this multi-billionaire financier who is an asset of this cabal. And how that has inverted and completely changed the former liberal left. Well, the same guy is putting similar amounts of money into a network which operate around a group of his called the Open Society Foundations, Open Society, Open Borders Foundation, to drive this movement of people around the world. And this is not in any way a racist thing, because if you want to change European society and fuse it, then you move people in from where you can move them into. So you have a big movement of people out of the Middle East and North Africa. You can't do that in America because there's a massive ocean between them. So you do it from the south, from Central and South America. And you know, this is a situation where the people moving into these societies and the people already there, this is not an us and them. They're both being manipulated by the same hands holding their strings. They're just being played off against each other, and they want that. They want divide and rule. They want conflict. And so this is all part of it. And see, if you look at where this Soros massively funded progressive mentality is going, they want an end to borders. They're talking about open borders, an open society foundation. And there's something about open borders which really can't be denied. When there are no borders, there are no countries. Because you cannot administer a country unless it has borders. Because you've got no control over what goes on there. And it just so happens, as again I've been writing about 30 years, is that this cabal and its movement towards this world society, centrally controlled, wants an end to countries. And so you have this progressive mindset, the successor, the inverted successor, to the old liberal left that used to challenge corporations and challenge financial power dictating to the population. Now they're cheering on the internet corporations that censor people with views that are not progressive in their mindset. They cheer on those that want to take borders down. And they also claim, in their bewilderment, that they are anti-establishment and progressive, when what they are the stormtroopers of the very establishment and its agenda that they claim to be opposing.
One of the control tactics that you speak about, which I absolutely love, is problem, reaction, solution. How does that work?
Dead simple. All the best perception manipulation techniques and behavior manipulation techniques are dead simple. I've talked about one already, the totalitarian tiptoe. This is where you start at A and you know you're going to Z, but you know if you go in too big a leap, then the change will be such that it might alert the population of what's going on. So you go in steps, and each step is promoted as if it's in and of itself. But if people like me research this and look deeper into it, they see that actually it's not in and of itself, it's a pattern in going in a certain direction, bit by bit, step by step. And alongside that, you have what I call problem, reaction, solution, something a term I've been using since the 1990s. And it's real simple. You want to change the world, you want to change a situation, you want to change a country. And you know that if you announce that you're going to make that change, just announce it, then you're going to get a lot of kickback from the population who are going to say either, what are you doing, this is ridiculous, we don't need it, or we're not having that. So what you do is you play problem, reaction, solution. Stage one, you create a problem, whatever problem that relates to what you want to make the change in society about. So it could be a government collapse, it could be a financial collapse, it could be a terrorist attack, whatever. You then, through an unquestioning mainstream media, you tell the population the version of that problem that you want them to believe. You give a false reason why the problems occurred. You give a false villain for why it happened, like bin Laden and 9/11. And then you want at stage two the population to react in a way that is outrage, it's fear, it's saying do something, this can't go on, something must be done. And then you, who've covertly created the problem and blame someone else, then offer the solution to the problems you have created in response to the reaction you glean from your manufactured problem. And these solutions are changes in society that push the agenda on towards this dystopian, Orwellian, Brave New World. And it's played on us all the time, all over the world, day after day after day. And the antidote to it is who benefits. The question, who benefits? When these authorities are telling us what should happen as a result of some problem, the question should be, who benefits? Who benefits from me believing what they're telling me about this problem, and who benefits from the solutions that they are suggesting? And again and again and again and again and again, it will be, who benefits? Anyone that wants to drive the world to more and more centralization of power, more and more deletion of freedom, and more divide and rule, and more imposition upon the perceptions of the population. And so that antidote question, who benefits, completely disarms the power of problem, reaction, solution, but only if it's asked. And the other thing about problem, reaction, solution, it absolutely depends to its foundations on a compliant, unquestioning mainstream media. Because if you had a proper media and you had proper journalists whose job it is, a proper journalist, to hold authority to account and to make sure the authority is telling us the truth, which is what the alternative media seeks to do, then problem, reaction, solution would fail every time. Because at stage one, they would create the solution and blame the villain. And proper mainstream journalists would start investigating both the problem and the alleged villain, and they would find over and over and over again that actually none of that is true, at which point there is no opportunity to offer the solution and change society, because your reason to do it has been taken apart and exposed. But because we don't have journalists overwhelmingly in the mainstream, we have repeaters, we have propaganda careerists who won't rock the boat but just repeat what the authority tells them, then problem, reaction, solution doesn't get questioned except by people like me, and thus the solutions keep getting applied, which are transforming human society.
David, if today was your last day on Earth and you could only leave humanity with 3 pieces of advice, 3 messages, what would they be?
1, stop self-identifying with the labels that you give yourself and are given to you. Men, women, and I'm not, talking about, oh no, gender, that gender thing. No. You accept, of course you do, that you are having an experience as a woman, and you enjoy it. You express it and experience it. Wonderful. Or a man. You have an experience as a white man, a white woman, a black man, a black woman, an Asian man, an Asian woman, whatever, a Muslim man, a Muslim woman. You have an experience of that and enjoy it. But don't self-identify that is who you are, that set of labels. Who you are is the consciousness that's having those experiences. And they're transitory. They will, they arrive when you arrive in this body, and you start to develop labels, which society wants to label more and more and more people in more and more fine detail. That's why that LBGT letter line gets longer and longer. Enjoy the experience. Enjoy the experience of being heterosexual. Enjoy the experience of being gay. Enjoy the experience of being transgender. But don't lose sight of the fact that that's not who you are. You are the awareness that's having the experience, and at the end of the 70 years or whatever it is for the individual, you will leave the body, your consciousness, your awareness will leave the body, and it will also leave the labels behind. Just an experience, transitory, very short. And if we self-identify both individually and collectively with labels, then the divide and rule potential is just limitless, which is why that's what they do. They play races and colours and religions and income brackets off against each other, all the labels. That's how they do it. Once you realise that actually what we are is a point of attention within an infinite state of awareness, and actually the person who calls himself Jewish is a point of attention in the same infinite awareness that I am, or the person that calls himself Muslim or atheist or whatever is the same, then you realize that this labeling and this allowing ourselves to be divided by the labels is ridiculous. So once you don't self-identify with labels, you no longer want your label to dominate everyone else's label, because you know it's just a transitory experience. So that's number one. Number two, don't just conceptualize that, but live it. Live your life as if you are the consciousness having the experience and not the experience in itself, the label. And you'll start to realize that experiences stop having the emotional traumatic impact upon you on the scale they did before, when you were self-identifying with the label, and therefore you were the experience instead of being the consciousness having the experience. It's not the same thing. And third, live your truth. Speak your truth. And if people don't like it, well, they can do the other thing. But remember this, people speaking their truth throughout human history, which was at odds with the truth of the time, the prevailing societal truth at the time, have been the only people that have ever moved society on. Of course, they're the only people that ever can. Because otherwise, you're the eddy in the river, going round and round and round. The eddy's never challenged, never questioned, and thus goes on infinitely. So speak your truth. And if it has validity, it will be shown to be so. I went through historic levels of abuse and ridicule, but I kept speaking my truth, irrespective. I spoke it louder. And what happened? Now, that truth is being shown more and more blatantly to have had validity all along. And thus now, enormous numbers of people are looking at my work it weren't before. If I had have caved all those years ago and said, oh, I better keep my mouth shut, people would not be looking at my work now. Because if I came out and said, oh, I said this would happen, well, you're just saying that. Well, actually, it's in black and white 20, 25 years ago. And it's only in black and white from 20, 25 years ago. Of course, I said it at the time, despite the monumental abuse and ridicule that I was taking. So once you realize that you are consciousness having an experience, the abuse and the ridicule doesn't matter, because it's transitory. And it's not defining who you are and what you think of yourself. Because what they're attacking, the labels, are not what you are anyway. So this is, again, the antidote to this intimidation to stay silent on things that absolutely must be talked about.
David, it's been an absolute pleasure. You're currently doing your Everything You Need to Know tour. Give us a snapshot of what people will learn at those nights up.
Well, an enormous amount of things, because I've been researching this, well, I say this subject, it's actually an absolute massive subjects connected together for 30 years. So compressing that into 4 hours, which is what I'm going to be doing in the evening talks in Australia, in Brisbane and Melbourne and Sydney and Adelaide and Hobart in March is a challenge. But what I do is connect an enormous number of dots that don't appear to be connected. And with each new dot connecting to each new dot, a picture emerges of the world which explains what is happening in the world and why, in a way that without the connections people would not see. So I've been doing this particular presentation now across Britain and across Europe, and the impact has been amazing, because suddenly it's, whoa, so that's what's going on. And so that's what I'll be doing in Australia.
We look forward to going there. David Icke, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
For me too. I'll see you in Melbourne, right?
I look forward to it.
Brilliant. See you, mate.